There was a time, not so long ago, when superhero movies felt a little simpler. A time when a single, iconic red and blue suit swinging through the New York skyline was enough to rule the box office. The Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy defined a generation. But as that era ended, we were left with one of the biggest what-ifs in comic book movie history. What if Sam Raimi had made Spider-Man 4? And what if Mark Webb's The Amazing Spider-Man 3 hadn't been canceled? One promised a return to form, a masterpiece of character-driven storytelling. The other was a recipe for disaster, doomed before it even began. Today, we're exploring one of the most significant what-ifs in superhero lore. Why would Raimi's Spider-Man 4 have been a triumph, while The Amazing Spider-Man 3 likely would have faltered? Both Spider-Man 4 and The Amazing Spider-Man 3 were supposed to happen. They were planned, they have release dates, and in some ways, they were already in motion. But then, canceled, scrapped, forgotten. Both were left on the cutting room floor of cinematic history, leaving two very different legacies behind. Following the fan and critical backlash to Spider-Man 3, Sam Raimi was energized. He was eager to make a comeback with Spider-Man 4 and atone for the last film's shortcomings. Raimi wanted to bring back the grounded, emotional core that made the first two films so iconic. His vision was clear: a focused, character-driven story about Peter Parker's growth and struggles. The proposed elements included a more mature narrative and a return to a single, compelling villain, rather than an overstuffed roster. But why did Spider-Man 4 get canceled? Well, blame the studio. Raimi, frustrated with their creative interference and unable to crack a script he believed in under their tight deadline, walked away. He refused to compromise his vision for a cash grab. It would have been a worthy finale for the fans, a moment of closure for Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker, and probably the best final chapter a superhero trilogy ever got. In contrast, The Amazing Spider-Man 3 had a different set of problems. Unlike the Raimi trilogy, which began strong but faltered later, the Amazing series never quite found its footing. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was a disaster. It was a film that overshot its ambitions in attempting to create an entire cinematic universe before establishing its own narrative. It was overstuffed, melodramatic, and tonally confused. According to leaks and reports, The Amazing Spider-Man 3 would have doubled down on this chaos. The plot would have involved resurrecting Norman Osborn, Captain Stacy, and even Gwen Stacy, possibly as the villain Carnage, using some kind of miracle serum. But let's be real, Sony's track record with convoluted plots isn't exactly stellar. Plus, Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker was already drowning in trauma. Adding more bizarre resurrection gimmicks might have turned the film into the comic book soap opera we never asked for. The critical and commercial failure of the second film exposed just how disorganized things were behind the scenes. The TASM2 underperformed, and before anyone could figure out how to fix the broken franchise, the infamous Sony hack happened and Marvel Studios stepped in. The fan reactions to these two cancellations tell the whole story. Spider-Man 4 had something of a mythic quality to it. People wanted it. They craved that sense of closure. When news broke that it was canceled, there was a real sense of loss, like something special had been taken away. The Amazing Spider-Man 3, on the other hand, was met with less enthusiasm and more of a collective shrug. By the time it was officially scrapped, most people had already checked out. There was franchise fatigue and a feeling of relief that it was being put out of its misery. That's why when No Way Home brought Andrew Garfield back, people were thrilled, but not necessarily because they wanted The Amazing Spider-Man 3. They wanted justice for the actor and his brilliant performance, not for the broken franchise itself. Theories about Spider-Man 4 paint an incredible picture. We know that John Malkovich was cast as the Vulture and Anne Hathaway as Black Cat. Fans speculated that it would have focused on Peter finally learning to balance his life, perhaps setting up a family with Mary Jane in a satisfying conclusion. At the same time, The Amazing Spider-Man 3 probably would have revolved around Peter using that resurrection formula to cope with his grief. But let's be honest, those concepts were far too ambitious and emotionally risky for a franchise that was already unstable and had lost the trust of its audience. So, would they have worked? It all comes down to storytelling. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4 had heart, emotion, and a clear vision led by a director who was passionate about getting it right. The Amazing series, while featuring a fantastic lead in Andrew Garfield, lacked focus. It tried to be too many things at once: a gritty reboot, a teen romance, a cinematic Betaverse launcher, and it paid the price. Ultimately, Spider-Man 4 had the best chance. It had an experienced director, a dedicated fan base, and a story that made sense. If it had come out in 2011 as originally planned, it could have kept the original Spider-Man legacy intact and possibly even delayed the need for a reboot for years to come.